Okay, in the last video we talked about social, cultural, economic problems and things that are going on in Latin America. Now we're going to talk about Latin America and the world. And the first part we need to talk about is the United States of America, early American and British rule. So, all right, so Latin America and the world. Spain and Portugal are out. They Napoleon and losing all the revolutions, so Spain and Portugal are out, and now the industrial UK is going to be one of the first people to move in. uh, England is going to move to Latin America and start working with these new governments and the new countries that are created here. And they're going to come in as outsiders. Hey, we're not Spain, we're not Portugal. We're just here to help you, and we're here to do business with you. We're going to give you loans. We're going to help your economy along. And it sounded really nice. England was not interested in owning and conquering. And stop and ask yourself, why is that? England conquers all of India. England conquers half of Africa, the most populated places in Africa. Why didn't England just conquer Latin America after Spain and Portugal left? Well, I mean, if you really think about it, England is a bully in this time period. They're willing to pick on people who are weaker and will have a harder time defending themselves than they are countries that have militaries, Western style militaries with, guns and other, Western style tactics that the same they had. It would be a lot harder for them to fight in jungles against similar military than it is to conquer all of Africa. So they're not going there to own. They're not going there to conquer. So they're going to try to dominate through mercantilistic trade policies, and this is moving towards neo-imperialism, neo-colonialism, where it's we're not owning people anymore. We're doing business with them as a way to own them. So England will go through and give a lot of loans and a lot of money and start trying to basically build up the raw material extraction of Latin America, so they can get resources that don't grow in England and sent to British factories. So these raw materials are going to be used to create cheap factory goods. Um, as a result, though, we start to see Latin America become almost entirely dependent on the United States of America and Europe and their factories. Resources will be sent from Latin America to American or British factories, and then finished goods will be sent back, and we don't see any industrial development. It's the same thing that is happening in Africa and other places as well, too. And so Latin America is going to be lagging behind single resource exporting countries. Just now, instead of Spain and Portugal, now it's England, and now instead of being owned, they're just in debt. Because a lot of times England would say, well, we'll give you a loan and you can build a bridge or you can build train tracks, right? As the industrialization trains start to move in, they'll say, well, we'll build you train tracks, but you're going to have to pay for it over 50 to 100 years. And so these countries are constantly in debt to their European or American masters. One thing that does come up, and we'll talk about this changing later on, is the Monroe Doctrine. Pretty early on in American history, when America is a young fledgling country, President Monroe, his foreign policy doctrine was that there should be no more European colonization in the New World. In fairness, that period was already kind of gone and done with. But and at this time at that time we didn't have the ability to enforce it. But this is some of the first steps America's taking towards saying that the new world is closed off and America is going to be the leader. This time we couldn't enforce it, and actually England was taking an early lead. But we are starting to set the stage, saying that America is going to speak for the Western Hemisphere, and we'll talk more about that later on. All right, so that's the Monroe Doctrine, and we'll talk about later on about Roosevelt Corollary. That's more 20th century though. All right, so war with Mexico. So Mexico is a relatively young country, a new country. Pretty early in their history, though, with just a couple of decades, they're going to go to war with their neighbor to the North America. So Texas joins the United States of America. That's kind of the first precursor here. So Texas joins the United States of America. Why is that? Well, they have their own revolution. Originally, Texas was part of Mexico. It was largely uninhabited. The Mexicans encouraged people, especially, including also, white colonists from the Americas, to go to Texas and start moving in this area. A lot of the Americans who moved to Texas went there and brought their slaves with them and brought the cotton industry with them and became very rich and powerful in Texas. Well, Mexico banned slavery before the United States of America did, and before these people in Texas wanted it to go away. And so Texas banned slavery. That's going to be one of the leading causes of the Texan Revolution. Texas fights a war against Mexico and joins the United States of America. So there will briefly be the Lone Star Republic and all that. Not important for this class. Anyway, so Texas joins the United States of America. Almost immediately, the United States of America starts disputing this new border with Texas and Mexico. Where should the line be? Where is Texas and where is the United States of America now, and where is Mexico? America says the Rio Grande River should be the natural border. But Mexico disputes it. Nobody wants to give up territory. The United States of America sends Zachary Taylor. He's just a general at this time. He will eventually be an American president, but we send Zachary Taylor out with an army towards the river in a very aggressive motion. Now, we're not crossing the border yet. American troops are not crossing the border, but Zachary Taylor and his army are marching like head on towards Mexico. So it obviously looks like we're going to invade Mexico. So we start moving towards the river, and this is kind of like playing I'm Not Touching You with your sibling in the back of the car. We get really close to the border and kind of instigate this attack to happen. A small group of Mexican soldiers attack the American army, go after Zachary Taylor, and that is our justification then for war, because we were attacked by Mexico. So that's the way we're going to play it out. And the United States of America goes to war with Mexico. In reality, we were already planning for war and hoping for war. This just made it a lot easier for us. War was inevitable, really, at this point. So U.S. Goes to war, and troops quickly move in. American troops, because we were ramping up for the war already, move in and start flooding Mexican territories, including what's going to be northern California, or northern Mexico, California, and eventually all of Mexico. So the Mexican-American War. White settlers and U.S. troops largely start taking over places like California. Once again, there's going to be a very short-lived Bear Flag Republic. You don't need to know about it really for this class. American troops take Veracruz in 47 and then march towards Mexico City, just constantly pushing into Mexico. Mexicans, for the longest time period, the Mexican people defended on their high grounds, but were totally outflanked and surrounded by American troops. And eventually, the capital of Mexico, Mexico City, falls, and Mexico's gone. So Mexico, the Mexican areas could be entirely wrapped up by the United States of America. But stop and think about it. Texas obviously is part of America. California is part of America. A lot of these areas here are part of the United States of America, but we had troops all throughout this region. We conquered all of this region. Why didn't we take it all? So, after America basically conquered all of Mexico, we had troops in their capital. That's pretty much that's endgame. The question is, how much of Mexico should we take? Some radical people in our government, Seward was the big push for this. It was Lincoln's Secretary of State was a big push for this. But some people said we should take it all because they wanted all of North America to be part of the United States of America. One day including Canada, one day all of Mexico. They believed all of North America should be the United States of America. So some people said we should just keep it all. We ended up agreeing, though finally, the final result is, and we'll talk about why this is, we ended up agreeing to take about half of it. About 50% of Mexico became part of the United States of America. We paid $15 million. This is the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. We paid $15 million to Mexico, and basically, that's kind of a pittance for half of your country. But we paid them $15 million for Utah, New Mexico, California, Nevada, Arizona, parts of Colorado, Wyoming, this whole entire area here. And once again, they used to have Texas. We just got Texas. That's what led to the war. So we got Texas already too, and the Rio Grande is now the new border. Now, if you lived in this area and you were a Mexican person, if you lived in this area, you were granted U.S. citizenship. So all of a sudden, we do see a larger population of, Latin American, Hispanic people in this country. That's also worth pointing out is that there are people who, live in this country who are Mexican American who have lived in this country, who lived in California or Nevada or these places before America was even in the country. But anyways, America moves in, they all become U.S. citizens. This will be a big reason for the U.S. Civil War. This is all right before the U.S. Civil War. We're talking about largely the 40s here. 20 years later, the U.S. Civil War. How is this connected? Well, these new areas here are sort of in the South, right? And we already talked about Texas and stuff, but these new areas are sort of in the South. And a lot of Southerners in the United States of America said, hey, these should all be slave-owning places. All of these new lands that we just conquered should be slave-owning. Meanwhile, other people in the North said no. They said no, it shouldn't be. They should be areas set aside for free white men to go and move to without having to compete with slave labor. Or they said the states, these new areas, these new colonies should be able to decide their fate and decide if they want to have slavery or not have slavery. This is going to be one of the major causes of what's called the sectional crisis leading up to the U.S. Civil War, which you'll learn more about in AP US. All right, so why didn't we take all of Mexico? This is a big question. The answer is just racism in early 19th century America. If you go back, if you're really bored, if you want to go back and look up like what people debated in Congress, it's pretty racist at this time period. The way they were discussing Mexico, the way they were discussing what would have to happen if they wanted to take all of Mexico, is pretty racist. So why not more Mexico? Because it was full of Mexican people, Spanish-speaking people, um, mestizo people, much more intermixing. We've already talked about that before. The mestizo cultures that developed in Latin America, they're different racial history. So we see much more, Latin American, Hispanic people, and they're mostly Catholic. Think of the United States of America, white-dominated, English-speaking people, and mostly Protestants. We've only ever had one Catholic president, and that was in the 20th century. At this time period, a Catholic president would have been outlandish to most people. So a very Protestant, English-speaking, white country now gets this huge amount of territory. Now, if we took all of North America, that means we would take all of these people. What would that be? How would that look? A lot of American politicians said, well, it would have to be ruled like the British were ruling India, and that was, a disaster over there too. And a lot of Americans didn't have the stomach for that kind of colonialism, where we would conquer these area people and try to convert them and do all sorts of terrible things. Some American politicians said that maybe all the people should be basically genocided if we were to conquer the area. And that's seriously what they talked about in Congress. That was what was discussed, and what we should do with this new land. It was an incredibly racist, dark period in history. Of course, this is right before the U.S. Civil War, so it's all in that kind of time period. End result, though, let's see if I can go back here. We take 50% of Mexico. So we take half of Mexico. We only take 5% of the population. This area here, and I know California is massively populated today, right? But this area here was only about 5% of Mexico's entire population. So we take half their land, but only 5% of their population. And the reason why is because of racial reasons. We could have taken all 100%. We had conquered them. But the racial reasons are why we only take half and 5% of their population. All right, so adding all of Mexico is conflicting with the idea of manifest destiny, white people from ocean to ocean, a lot of racial ideas that were popular during this time period, and that's how parts of Mexico became America.